Hi friends, this is Angie, Angela Paradisney, continuing with the reading of Daniel Ryder's book, Cover Up of the Century. The first video I did chapters 1 and 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I'm going on to chapter 7. And let's just continue. Okay, chapter 7, teen involvement. More and more youth are being drawn toward all types of sadistic hate groups, Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis, satanic cults. According to a June 3rd, 1988 Fort Worth Star-Telegram article, quote, cult activity is on the increase in Mansfield and southeast Tarrant County, police and school officials said yesterday. Mansfield police officer Bill Parrish said dabblers in the occult are adolescents who have just become involved in Satanism. It's the first stage of Satan worship, typified by stealing from churches, burning Bibles, and desecrating cemeteries. He said it also may involve sacrificing small animals. And I'll just say in spiritual terms, this is like the opening of the gateways to demonic attachments. So by the time these people get sucked in irrevocably, it's a real demon possession. I'm just saying that from a spiritual perspective. And in some cases, it may involve much more. May the 5th, 1990, and I pray as well. I pray every time I read from this book, which is my first time reading it. And for everybody in the sound of my voice, I pray for protection and for just the armor of God, the full armor of God, the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, the belt of truth goes around our loins, especially the shield of faith that quenches every fiery dart of the enemy, and the sword of the Spirit, which is every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And I put on the shoes shod, ready to go forth with the gospel of peace. May 5th, 1993. 3 8-year-old boys were riding their bikes down a country road in West Memphis, Arkansas. Suddenly, they were forced off the road and horribly killed. One of the suspects accused in the murder, Jesse Lloyd Miskelly Jr., according to wire service reports, told police that the murders were tied to a satanic cult. Miskelly said the children were lured into a wooded area of West Memphis known as Robin Hood Park, choked until they were unconscious, and then brutalized in various ways, including rape. He said he ran off into the woods and threw up after watching Jason Baldwin, 16, mutilate one unconscious youngster. Police have said the boys died from blows to the head, but have refused to say if they were sexually mutilated. Miskelly also told police the cult held orgies in the woods and that to join, members had to kill dogs and eat their back legs. According to a USA Today article at the time, another suspect, Michael Eccles, 18, who calls himself, quote, Damien, from the movie Omen about the Antichrist, once told a pastor he couldn't go to heaven because he was already committed to going to hell. The article also said Eccles is described by acquaintances as someone who carried a car skull, wrote satanic poems, and favored wearing all black. Shortly after the murders, I was asked to do the CNN talk show, Sonia Live, which was to focus on this incident. At the beginning of the show, there was a telephone link-up with an attorney for one of the suspects, who said he had followed the media reports and had read some 30 pages of depositions around the case. When asked to comment on the cult-related aspects of the case, he responded that, quote, at this time, they, officials, aren't characterizing it as a cult killing. 2 of the accused eventually got life. Another was sentenced to death. And for those that are listening to this now in 2020, you'll know that multiple celebrities mounted a campaign to actually get them out of prison. Most especially, I can't remember his name. Johnny Depp, is it? Anyway, this Damien Eccles is free again and feeling quite celebrated. According to a summary article of the trials in Memphis, Tennessee's The Commercial Appeal newspaper reported John Belfast noted, but prosecutors made little mention of occult connection to the crime, beyond the few references to Miss Kelly's statement to the police. The defense ridiculed the lack of hard evidence presented in court, and the University of California social psychologist Richard J. Ofshie attributed police allegations to, quote, satanic hysteria. Brittonton, Arkansas, Chief Juveniles Officer Jerry Driver was also involved with this case. He said Michael, quote, Damien Eccles was heavily involved in the occult. There were satanic cult ceremonies, and that the incident happened near a satanic high holy day. But he said he wasn't certain if these particular killings were tied to a formalized cult ceremony. Driver said satanic graffiti continues to crop up in the area, and there are rumors of other occult criminal activity. But at this point, he said nothing more has been found. Ohio ritual crime investigator Dale Griffiths was called as an expert witness in the case. He said, based on his research, the killings were a ritualized event. Griffiths said, for example, all three boys were tied in a similar fashion, and each was brutalized far beyond what it would take to simply kill them. Quote, my concern in this particular case is more whether they got all the group, said Griffiths, covering their tracks. In the Arkansas case, People magazine reported West Memphis authorities began looking into reports of ritualistic activities in the area almost a year prior. Among the sites they investigated was, quote, Stonehenge, a decaying local cotton gin, painted with satanic graffiti and strewn with animal carcasses, which a friend said one of the suspects visited. Also, according to the article, teens, quote, called up demons there as a joke, end quote. John Hunt, a ritual crime investigator and also a crime prevention officer at Austin College in Texas, has been actively investigating ritual crime sites since 1989. During this time, he said he has also developed ritual crime seminars and trainings to educate law enforcement. He said the training has evolved because the issue is coming up more and more. More police officers have been trained in ritualistic crime because before, when there was a crime scene with these ritualistic components, they were merely treated as other things. Hunt said he knew there was a lot of ritual crime being perpetrated in Grayson County, Texas, and decided to start to actively investigate. Even this would often take him out of his physical jurisdiction. He has actually become somewhat of a ritualistic crime investigator maverick, investigating on his own and turning the information over to whatever law enforcement agency was responsible for a particular area. He said sometimes the information has been accepted gratefully, while other law enforcement agencies didn't want anything to do with it. He explained that he believes that some agencies are simply in denial any of this ritual crime activity exists. I would suggest another reason for disinterest is being complicit. Just like the mafia used to always have police on board to, police in their pocket, the bent cops. The same with satanic covens. Hunt has seen satanic altars, dogs cut and blooded, sacrificed calves, even a 2,000-pound bull that had been ritually killed, the testicles and penis removed. One of the sites Hunt discovered was an abandoned home in rural Grayson County. He and another officer were led there by an informant. The home sat on a small knoll off by itself. They found walls, windows, and floors draped in heavy black plastic. Quote, "The plastic is used to keep people from seeing in and to keep the blood from staining," said Hunt. There were also imprints of a pentagram and 666 in the plaster, a candle holder, and a butcher knife with stains. In a planter rather than a plaster, sorry. 3 weeks after Hunt and the other officer were there, the house burned down. Curiously, no gas or electric went to the house at the time. And the fire was so hot, said Hunt, it left no charred wood, just ash. Similar to the warehouse ritual site that burned down in California, Hunt said that this was the third ritual site he had investigated that subsequently burned down. Hunt said many of the cults are masters at covering their tracks and, quote, "When the heat gets too hot, they simply go underground for a while." Hunt has presented seminars on the occult to churches, service organizations, law enforcement agencies, even at an Indian reservation. He is also in the process of helping start, quote, Riot, Ritual Investigators of Texas. National Society. If anybody has updates on these people whose names I'm reading out, please put them in the comments. National Society. The International Council on Cultism and Ritual Trauma was established in 1993. Based in Richardson, Texas, its goal is to promote ongoing networking, advocacy, and research. Council President Randy Noblitt, PhD, said he has observed a marked increase in criminal and civil legal actions associated with allegations of ritual abuse. And he said he believes there needs to be standardized, non-oppressive police and judicial procedures so the survivor doesn't feel traumatized again by the system. The same as, for instance, some rape victims have felt in the legal system over the years, and still do. Ritual abuse goes to court. Some ritual abuse survivors are, in fact, starting to stand up for their rights legally. For instance, a Geauga County, Ohio common pleas judge awarded a $10 million default judgment to a Hiram, Ohio woman who charged that her father and other men raped her as a child during cult activities, according to a Cleveland Plain Dealer news report. I'm working with a survivor at the moment of satanic ritual abuse, including her parents, and she's very keen on taking legal proceedings in Ireland. The lawsuit contended the abuse occurred in Russell Township, Mantua, and Hiram from 1963 to 1971. Jamie Ann Sitko, 37, claimed in psychotherapy sessions she, quote, vividly recalled incidents which involved men, including her father, standing in a circle around a fire with hoods, cat's blood, live cats, dead cats, candles, chants, and threats of violence to force her compliance, some of which were carried out, quote, according to lawsuit, or end of quote, according to lawsuit papers. James West Pooh, the father, who lives out of state, did not respond to the lawsuit or the plain dealer's interview requests. According to the article, Sitko brought the suit because, quote, people need to know that this does happen. If everyone spoke up about it, it would help others in the long run. Fantasy role, question mark. Some cult researchers and cult members talk about the game Dungeons and Dragons as a stepping stone to Satanism and sometimes murder. That might be the case for an Austin, Texas man. According to a December 9th, 1992 Austin American Statesman article, Dungeons and Dragons paraphernalia, pornographic magazines, and black robes, horns, and guns were found in the home of a man charged with fatally shooting a woman 13 times. Austin homicide detective Sergeant Dan Zahara said the suspect, James Noah, 23, told him he frequently played fantasy role-playing games. Quote, Noah's letters talk about demons and he dabbled in Dungeons and Dragons, said Zahara. Lots of people play the game and don't kill people, but he carried this fantasy land too far. Noah was charged with killing Rhonda Gale Lewis, 28, who was a topless dancer. According to the Austin American Statesman article, police found more than 200 computer disks, magazines, pictures of women in bondage, and articles with captions like, quote, Satan escapes from hell. The Statesman article said friends told police Noah had perverted sexual contacts with women over a computer network. Apparently, from reports, he was into masochism and bondage. The article also noted Noah had picked the role of, quote, assassin in several of the games. And one friend told the police that Noah, who worked in the computer room at Austin Community College, participated in computer bulletin boards, quote, to sublimate his desire to kill people. Merely cultural belief, question mark? Skeptics sometimes refer to talk about dangerous satanic cults as merely the paranoid product of unnatural beliefs. Cultural beliefs, I beg your pardon. Apparently not reality-based. However, for Sean Sellers, who was sentenced to death row in Oklahoma State Prison, the whole Satanism phenomenon was quite reality-based. And in fact, his involvement in Satanism was actually a calculated, methodical process. According to the book Cults That Kill, a friend testified Sellers had formed a satanic group called, quote, The Elimination. The friend testified he and Sellers wore black robes and drank blood. During the trial, Sellers said he actually wrote in his own blood, I renounce God, I renounce Christ, I will serve Satan, end quote. He eventually killed his parents and a convenience store owner as sacrifices to Satan. Quote, thou shalt not kill was the only one of the Judeo-Christian 10 Commandments he hadn't broken yet, Sellers said. In October 1986, he was convicted of 3 counts of murder. As a lead up to the Satanism and the murders, Sellers said he was heavily involved in the game Dungeons and Dragons, was fascinated with Ouija boards, horror films, black metal music. One black metal band, Venom, sings, candles glowing, altars burn, virgin's death is needed there, sacrifice to Lucifer, my master, bring the chalice, raise the knife, welcome to my sacrifice. Sergeant Ray Rast of the Independence, Missouri Police Department worked with ritual crime for 15 years. He said he's worked with numerous cases involving primarily teen, quote, dabblers in Satanism. However, he said several of the youth had gone so far as to write death contracts to Satan in their own blood. They would also sometimes self-mutilate with knives. I interviewed Sergeant Rast in 1996. He said he's observed an increase in teenage experimentation with Satanism the past 5 years, although he said he's watched it ebb and flow over the 15 years he's been involved working with it. Sergeant Rast also said it's been his observation many of the kids who get involved with Satanism, some from troubled homes with little structure, come from troubled homes with little structure and are looking for a sense of belonging. One would have to ask what was going on with the group of teens at Troy High School in Orange County, California. In June of 1996, I was in California to give a lecture in Orange County. The day I arrived, newspapers there were running front-page stories on some graduating seniors who had cut several animals in half and nailed them to trees outside the school. They also spray-painted the name of the black metal band Slayer on a wall of the school near the animals. Slayer was the band it was reported the California Satanic cult was listening to the night they killed the 4 defectors. I contacted an editor at the Orange County Register, a newspaper that has won a number of prestigious journalistic awards, and offered to give him at least one perspective of what might be going on behind the scenes. He told me a reporter had already talked to the kids involved and determined it was merely a prank, and they weren't going to do any more with the story. One would have to wonder if merely talking to the kids, in this case, would really yield the whole truth, or for that matter, constitute very thorough reporting. What would the kids in Arkansas have said if they were caught killing animals and spray painting at Stonehenge Park, say a month prior to killing the 8-year-olds? Chapter 8, Satanic Hysteria. A parent's nightmare, ? Ethan Watters said he initially started writing about the subject of satanic ritual abuse in connection with the Olympia, Washington Paul Ingram case. Paul Ingram claimed, as had members of his family, that he had abused them as part of satanic rituals. According to a May 1993 New Yorker magazine article, the prosecution flew Richard Offshee in to consult. Prior to Offshee's arrival, according to the article, some of the children's and father's stories of the cult ritual abuse weren't matching up. Offshee set up a, quote, little experiment for his first meeting with Ingram. Although Offshee had yet to talk with Ingram's daughters, he told Ingram he had. What's more, he said the daughters said they remembered he had forced them to have sex with each other. Ingram said he didn't remember that, but after thinking about it for a while, he told Offshee he could remember that. According to the New Yorker article, after later supposedly reviewing reports, interview data gathered, etc., Offshee contacted Ingram by phone and urged him to withdraw his guilty plea before the sentencing. The magazine reported on how part of that conversation supposedly went. At the time, according to the magazine piece, Ingram was having some doubts about the validity of his memories, and he was hopeful more would come. Quote, "I'll tell you something, Paul, you're never going to get them," Offshee said. "There's no way that you're going to be able to remember anything that's going to reconcile all the lies that have been told about this in the last few months." Then later in the conversation, quote, "Maybe somebody can blank out one event that was just life-threatening to them, terrifying, disgusting beyond belief," Offshee concluded. "Nobody can blank out as many events as you blanked out. It has never happened." Skeptics began pointing to the case and this article series as one of the benchmarks for the validity of false memory claims and the continued debunking of the existence of satanic ritual abuse. The New Yorker article writer Lawrence Wright went on to write a book about the case called Remembering Satan, A Case of Recovered Memory and the Shattering of an American Family. A review of the book in an April 4th, 1994 Newsweek starts out, "Paul Ingram's daughters are every parent's worst nightmare. Erica and Julie were obedient, responsible girls and faithful to their family's fundamentalist religion. Then in the fall of 1988, when Erica was 22 and Julie 18, Both daughters suddenly moved out of their parents' house in Olympia, Washington. Several weeks later, they told their mother and the authorities that their father had been sexually molesting them for years. Before long, they were embellishing their accusations with descriptions of Satan worship that included rape and the slaughter of babies. These young women were every parent's, quote, nightmare, and they were, quote, embellishing the stories, writes the Newsweek reviewer, who incidentally probably never interviewed the daughters. But he concurred they were, quote, embellishing, just like Ethan Waters knew the inside of young Sarah's mind, even though he had never talked to her. In my interview with Waters, he said he could approach the Mother Jones article about Kathy with a, quote, point of view, because magazine articles allow that type of subjective latitude. And while journalists are aware of the difference, I asked Waters how many people in the general public know there's this sort of unwritten rule with magazines. He told me a lot of people understood that. One has to ask, do they? One has to also ask, because Ingram was going through a series of apparently fragmented remembrances about his perpetration, was he more susceptible at that point to somewhat tacitly taking a suggestion of a memory from Ofshi because it just seemed to fit the general scenario? And for that matter, the New Yorker article even states, quote, none of the investigators would have been surprised if Ingram had orchestrated sex among his children. Knowing about other ritual abuse survivor accounts of things like forced sex between siblings, couldn't a questioner cleverly manipulate the situation to make the whole scenario appear that credible? One has to also ask if Ingram was in the early stages of having real flashbacks. As Harvard researcher Stephen Koslin postulates about brain functioning, was Ingram's imagination kicking in to prematurely fill out the rest of the storyboard? And did Ofshi's suggestion merely fit into that equation? Brackets, one has to also ask again if Ofshi knows anybody can blank out as many events as Ingram purported he had. Why are Harvard researchers like Dr. van der Kolk, Judith Herman and others finding some strong indications you can? Another couple crucial questions one has to ask about this case are, why have Ingram's daughters never backed down from their stories? And why was Ingram still sentenced to 20 years in prison for the charges? Of course, though, according to the New Yorker article, even going to prison may have been part of Ingram's motivation. The article states 4 years after Ingram's sentencing, quote, he works as an editor of the prison's newspaper and as a clerk in the prison's law library. He's always been drawn to the simple, regimented life, and prison is particularly agreeable to him. Panic in Pennsylvania. A 12-year-old girl fled from a house in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, telling of extreme ritual torture and other forms of abuse perpetrated on her and her 6 siblings by parents and neighbors. According to an Associated Press article, police say the mistreatment included beatings, cultish bloodlettings, exorcisms, sodomy, stretchings, heated needles under fingernails. Neighbors also participated. They, the children, told of satanic rituals, of Ricky Gaddis, the father, using ceremonial knives to draw blood from adults and children alike. Quote, they, the children, were terrified of him, absolutely terrified, Detective Yvonne Krug said. They believed he had superhuman powers. Court documents indicated Ricky Gaddis and his wife began sexually abusing 2 of their girls around January 1990, some 18 months before they moved into a 3-story building where the abuse intensified and other residents were drawn into the torturing, according to the article. Historical child sacrifice. People sometimes express skepticism at even the concept of parents torturing and sacrificing their children. And for some, it's sheerly unbelievable it would ever occur on a wide scale. Wisconsin cult researcher Jack Roper lectures on, quote, historical child sacrifice, and is currently working on a book on the same subject. Roper said the world has a long history of child and adult sacrifice. He cited Carthage, North Africa, from the 8th century BC to the 2nd century BC as a graphic example. This was a culture that worshipped the god Baal and the goddess Tanit. Brackets, Baal was that era's label for Satan. Children were regularly sacrificed to these gods. A University of Chicago archaeological team recently found a sacrificial site 64,000 square feet wide and 9 levels deep, with small burial urns with the bones of sacrificed children, said Roper. So I'll go on to chapter 9 as well, as they're very short chapters. Chapter 9, harassment. To have stayed as covert as they have for so long, some sadistic cults have had to be highly connected, highly thorough, and highly sophisticated. The following story indicates perhaps some of just how thorough and sophisticated. Brackets, the story also indicates the type of extensive investigation some of these cases entail. It was written by Akron, Ohio police detective and ritual crime expert Andrew Casada. Casada is a 23-year veteran of the Akron Police Department who also teaches about ritual crime in criminology courses at Akron University. Prior to his police work during a 3-year tour in Vietnam, he was awarded 2 Bronze Stars and an Army Commendation for valor and heroism. Satanic cult murder. An average of 130 reports a day come into the Akron Police Department. As was my practice, I took one off the felonious assault board to work on. The victim was a white 37-year-old female. There was something unusual about this report as I read it. 2 men and 1 woman entered the victim's home, burned her with acid, cut her, then ritualistically drank the blood that ran from a cut above the pubic area. To follow up on the report, I spoke to the victim, Susan, who at the time was confined to the psychiatric ward of the local hospital. Due to her early association with the Satanic cult, she displayed multiple personality disorder. To escape the horror of what was happening to her in the cult, she would revert to another personality. Sue's medical records documented 125 distinct personalities developed because she was born into the cult and abused by her parents and grandparents who were also involved. When I met with Sue, she relayed to me things that sounded insane, but she named names, times, and vaguely places. Sue was permitted to leave the hospital accompanied by her therapist, Grace. Grace said that if I had any questions, she would ask them of Sue, and Sue would in turn write out the answers. When I got the answers on a piece of paper, they made no sense and looked like a jumbled mess. The therapist then told me to hold the paper with the answers on it upside down and backwards against the windshield. There before me in the reflection on the windshield were my answers, perfectly written. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as the sergeant who was driving the car looked startled. Sue directed us to abandoned mines where she claimed sacrificial bodies were disposed of. She stated the Satanists would put the bodies into wood chippers that would pulverize the body and expel the fragments into the mine shafts. As a safety precaution, The shafts were cemented closed, and the Ohio Bureau of Natural Resources, although helpful, would not permit us to enter because of the danger. After taking Sue back to the hospital, I started checking into some of the names she'd given me. One was a minister in charge of a small church in town. I visited the church, which had no windows or other way to see in. I went to the minister's house. He seemed a bit nervous at my visit. He explained his church was a touchy-feely church where each individual did whatever they thought was proper. Other names mentioned by Sue included judges, attorneys, policemen, and other prominent people. I contacted the FBI in Quantico, Virginia, because I had no one to turn to who was experienced at this type of case. I spoke to an agent who suggested some reading material. When I began reading, I started to understand Sue's situation. I understood the victimization and means used to force unwilling members to participate. The nature of the rituals became clearer also and seemed to fit what Sue was telling me. At about the same time, the minister I'd visited was seen at the hospital with a name tag bearing a different name than his own. Sue clammed up and stated that she was not safe. Shortly after, Sue was discharged from the hospital and sent home to her husband and children. The husband assured me that he was not cult involved and would keep an eye on her. Sue then started claiming that the Satanists were entering her home at night, drugging her family. They could do with her as they wished. Although a watch was put on the house, none of this was ever substantiated. She claimed they used acid to burn her, cut her. She claimed they put wine into her vagina and drank it. A major problem with her injuries was that it was possible they could have been self-inflicted. I was at a dead end and could neither prove nor disprove any of her claims. I then talked to her doctor, who stated that all she was saying seemed to him to be true. Her psychiatrist was so convinced, along with her nurses and psychologists, of these truths, that they put the pressure on for results. I performed every logical sequence to a normal investigation. However, scenes of supposed cult activity were void of any evidence. On one occasion, we traveled to a site deep in the woods of a town in southern Ohio. We followed Sue's directions and didn't realize it was a site until we came within a few feet of it. The site was a triangular shape formed with vine and could hold approximately 20 people. It held a pit where there had been a fire, and a freshly cut Christmas tree was by the entrance to the triangle, by the apex. There was also what at first appeared to be a hitching post between two trees fastened to the tree with vine. The post was singed and moved freely up and down about a foot. When I showed Sue the pictures of the site and asked about the hitching post, she explained that females were strapped to it, sexually penetrated, then their bodies licked with flame. The Christmas tree was for the purpose of desecration. Although there were no fir trees in the area, I just could not picture someone going to all this trouble of carrying the tree into the area, engraving ankhs and pentagrams on it, and connecting all that vine, if what she had said happened here didn't. Something happened. A second spot was checked where she claimed we would find a house with a cornfield next to it, where many sacrifices took place. The floors would be soaked with human blood, and the cornfield would contain crushed bone and teeth. We went there on a Saturday and parked in front of the house and took a quick look around. It appeared to be abandoned but secure. Upon our return 2 days later, the house was gone. Wow. A neighbour stated that it had burned down on Saturday and that it was bulldozed Sunday. We did a foot search of the cornfield looking for anything, a tooth or a fragment of bone. We did find some bones, which appeared to be too easy to locate. The bones were sent to the coroner's office, who in turn sent them to the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian later identified them as pig bones. On and on it went. Every turn we took, we came to a dead end. During these so many months, Sue called me, telling me how Satanists were coming and getting her, taking her to ceremonies, killing the family pets, and threatening to kill her and her children if she didn't stop talking. The husband could neither confirm nor deny her stories. He just didn't know. Every lead was followed. Every name was checked out. Those that could be talked to were. At times, I believed the validity of her claims, but then thinking how bizarre her stories were and my inability to prove her claims, doubt reigned. During the interim, I was having meetings with the hospital staff, giving them information and explaining what evidence was needed for prosecution. They in turn gave me material on multiple personality disorder, MPD, and Sue's progress. In my readings, I discovered that MPD was caused when a person goes through physical and psychological trauma in early childhood and splits the present personality that can cope with the pain of the abuse. The new personality may be of the opposite sex, younger, older, uneducated, or even speaking a foreign language. The number of personalities and types are only restricted to the person's mind. I've found MPD to be prevalent among over half of the ritual abuse survivors I've worked with. When word got out of my investigations, I received 20 new cases, all giving me basically the same scenario. Again, all coming to a dead end. Every available investigative tool was used: polygraph, crime scene searches, crime lab, etc. Nothing, not a shred of evidence that pointed anywhere. All of the victims were giving me the same names and more places that sounded the same, or places of the same general description. Sue's cooperation diminished with my inability to bring anyone to justice. During this time, the Rape Crisis Centre cancelled Sue. The chief caseworker took Sue's case because of the difficulty of the case. The caseworker told me she was getting harassing, chanting phone calls and was being followed by a white male, even in the courthouse. Just as suddenly as that started, it stopped. The stories kept coming in from Sue of sacrifices in the valley, in the Peninsula Road area. There were stories of heads being in a fireplace, children being bred for sacrifice in Youngstown, their bodies burned, broken, and scattered in the fields, streams, and woods. Women being beaten and sexually mistreated, then being filmed, and the films being sold for profit. Every devious crime was conveyed to me. Her recollection of how she was transported to some of the ceremonies and where they took place was very vague, because she said she was drugged at home before leaving for the site. Sue was convinced that her days were numbered and the cult would eventually get her. It wasn't until I talked to her for long durations of time did I convince her that she was safe if she kept helping me expose them. Satanists apparently had instilled the fear of death in her so severely that to get her active in talking with me took more effort on my part. Sue was readmitted to the hospital because she claimed to have been ritualistically abused, cut, bruised, and burned. The doctors once again felt she was not doing it to herself, unless it was a personality she had within her they were not familiar with or had not discovered. When I would ask her how these people were getting in, she said they would call on the phone and trigger her by some means which would bring a cult loyal alter personality forward. That personality would open the door for them. And once inside, they would do what they wanted with her. They would come while her husband was at work. It just always worked out that no one saw anything but Sue. All along, she kept stating they would kill her and make it look like a natural death. It took a great deal of time to regain Sue's confidence. During this time, she moved to another neighborhood, thinking that this would keep the cult away. It didn't. She became less and less talkative and seemed to fear me. Since she eventually stopped complaining about the cult bothering her and was getting along with her therapists, I moved on to other cases, which gave me more probability of an arrest. You can't spin your wheels on a non-productive case, which her case had become. I was hearing from other survivors that Sue was in danger. Therapists began to worry that she was not doing well. Therapists and doctors could not understand why I could not go out and arrest these people. I tried to explain that this type of investigation is difficult due to the nature of the underlying problem, not to mention dealing with somebody who has MBD with little concrete information. Sue did show us an actual site and gave some good information. However, was she truly in danger? Would the cult be foolish enough to harm someone who was by now well known to the police? I did not think that they could pull it off, since we knew too much about her for them to take her life in any manner. In addition, she was writing a daily journal, and her husband was supposedly keeping a constant eye on her. Time went on, and it got to the point that I heard nothing from her, and less about her from other survivors and therapists. Her case seemed to fade into obscurity. New cases were taking more and more of my time. Then the unexpected happened. I had just gone to bed. On February the 4th, 1991, when my daughter came in and said there was someone on the phone. It was Sue's therapist, who stated bluntly that Sue was dead. I was very shocked, and many thoughts went through my mind. How could this be? Did I miss these warnings she was giving me? Had I blown it off too easily? Could I have prevented her death? I laid silently thinking 1,000 thoughts. All I kept thinking was what people that knew her had said. They're going to kill her, and you'll never prove it. At this time, her children and her husband were in therapy, and her husband always seemed cooperative on the phone, but could never seem to find the time to talk to me. Let me state that the first thing drilled into your head is you don't run into a crime scene, especially a homicide. You don't touch anything. You secure the scene and call the coroner. No police officer has the authority to declare death. After talking to the therapist, I called the Detective Bureau desk man and asked if a call had come in from the coroner's office about a death at Sue's address. He stated that there hadn't been any call. I asked him to send a cruiser and let me know as soon as possible. Within an hour, he had called me back and said the coroner was on the scene with the husband and the body was transported to a local hospital. Never in my career have I had a coroner's investigator move a body without at least having a police cruiser present. This meant that the death scene was completely destroyed. The husband cleaned the room and straightened everything up. Conflicting statements came from the husband. He stated to the coroner's investigator that he knew Sue was alive because he heard her walking around. Later, he told a second investigator that he knew she was alive because he heard her snoring when he went by the bedroom. The therapist stated he told her he could tell she was alive because when he was outside getting into the car, he could hear her. The therapist asked, "How could you hear her inside the house?" He said he saw the bathroom light on. There was talk that the cult had injected her vaginal wall with a substance that would make her heart stop. This was not found in the autopsy, which was insisted on by me. The coroner's office stated that she died of natural causes. A white female, 39 years of age? ? It appeared as if the coroner's investigation was pushing for a quick solution. It was explained to me by the coroner's office that Sue was on self-prescribed laxatives and fleet enemas, and this had depleted her body of potassium, causing an electrolyte imbalance that in turn caused her heart to stop. She wrote in her journal, quote, "You sought help. All of us have favored you and granted your great need of my counsel. You invoked me. Now you will serve me. Lucifuge. Satanic. Agalurebt. Fleortli. Sacragatala. Rebellious. Bail. Agraris. Marbas. Barbatas. Boagus on Boyas. And all other demons come join us. Watch our empower Lucifer. Have you? Come on, Bathim, Person, Abigar, Lomi, Valafor, Foranu, Iperos, Numerous, Glacia, Volos, come now. You now have what you want. We already have Tamara. Now we have your soul. Your time has come. Don't fight it. You will enjoy it, Tamara. Oh, cleanse me from that, Jesus. This was her last journal entry. The writing is in the handwriting of Tamara, one of her alter personalities that was satanically involved. It seems as though she knew something was coming. All of her journals are in the hands of coroner's investigators who are frantically trying to make sense of this death and all its tangents. If she was using laxatives and enemas, the potassium electrolyte levels would be low. They were not. A sample of the vitreous humour shows that her potassium level was high, but she was not taking potassium supplements. It is still not known when this last entry was made in her journal. The more this case is studied, the less things make sense. I'm sorry, my sister died in very suspicious circumstances. This is just quite a little bit triggering. The more this case is studied, the less things make sense. Why did her husband change his story so many times? Would a puncture wound in her uterus show? What chemical would stop the heart and leave no trace? These and many more questions come to mind. My commanders have been more than supportive of this and other investigations I've had. These are very difficult cases. The coroner is convinced it is a natural death and is going to rule it as such. Other cult victims are convinced that Sue was murdered by the particular cult she belonged to. I'm not firmly convinced either way. In the state of Ohio, the coroner is the top law enforcement official, and his decision is final. So it lies as stated. The coroner's office and myself are still looking at the journals, said the husband. I would have felt a lot better if people wouldn't have told me it was going to happen, and for it to happen exactly as Sue stated. I'll leave it there. I'll perhaps find some of the videos I talk about my sister's death and the coroner writing it up in a way that was totally contrary to the autopsy. Angela Power Disney, YouTube and Facebook, angelascashes.org, no apostrophe, and CACHES is the spelling of Caches. God bless.